So what language is before you? Huh? Japanese. How do you know that? You just do. You know, if learning a language was that easy, it would be wonderful, wouldn't it? I just do. You're right. It is Japanese. And of course it says, good morning. Ohayou gozaimasu. Yeah, I remember that because I'm from Ohio, and that's what you say in Japanese, Ohayou gozaimasu, with the proper accent, which I do not have. Yeah, tough language. When you're learning a Latin American language as a new missionary, you usually take about a year for formal Bible study. In Asian languages, it's usually double that at least. And even then, the ongoing curve is a big one. And so it's a challenge. But you can learn it. 2 years of formal study to learn any language is a relatively short time when you think about it. And it takes a lot of discipline. And in learning any language, there is a moment when, or there are moments when you feel like you just can't do this anymore. Your brain feels fried. You feel like you've maxed out your capacities. There are times when you feel like you're actually going backwards rather than forwards. You're forgetting more than you're learning. And that's just part of the process that your brain goes through in trying to manage all the information that's coming in. How many of you are bilingual? You speak fluently English and another language? Maybe I should ask if you speak English fluently. Ask the right spot. Anybody trilingual? Speak 3 languages. Okay, all right. All right. We'll have a word of prayer, and then what I'm going to ask you to do is take a 3x5 and put your name, date, and a yes or no to in response to the case study question for today. All right, so let's pray and we'll get started. Thank you, Father, for a beautiful, crisp morning. Thank you for the unfailing and unending love that you have shown to us through the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you that you've given us the Spirit of God. He is our instructor. He is our motivator. He is our empowerment to live the life that you have given us to live. And I thank you for each one of these students, each life representing a unique plan in your all-encompassing purpose for this age. And I pray that you would help us to take delight in knowing that we've been chosen by God and that you love us, you want to use us, you want us to make a difference for eternity as we yield ourselves to you each day. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so on a 3x5, if you would kindly, and don't forget to put your full name. And, there's Japanese. Good morning. All right. The case study: should the pastor be disciplined by his church for wife beating? That's simple yes or no. And when you've completed that, just pass those to the aisle and we'll collect them. That will also serve as your attendance record for today. All right. You study case studies as a class, and as you get into ministry, and you're already involved in ministry, so this is already true to some degree, you get to the place where you can develop your own case studies. Interesting things happen to you in whatever you're doing, and you find that you can use those in the future to ask others, what would you do in this situation? And so case studies approximate real situations. I think I explained before that some of these are actual situations with changed names, and others of them are created scenarios that reflect actual situations. So, and I have no way of knowing which are which. They're all kind of thrown together. It doesn't really matter because all of them are realistic if they're not, in fact, real historical occurrences. Thank you. Thanks. That it? All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to continue talking about these cultural dimensions or values. We have a few left, and then we're going to jump into some non-Christian religions. And so I believe that we are ready for what we call lifestyle. Is it about who you are or what you do? And there are cultures on this planet that make a big deal about time and efficiency, such as ours. And we talked about that the other day, that time and accomplishments are money, they're a commodity, and therefore they drive capitalism, right? There are other cultures that pay a lot less attention to how many things you check off of your list of things to do. They're more concerned about the development of the whole person. And their estimation of value in life is not hinged to accomplishments. It's hinged more to character, to family. You'll find that in collectivistic cultures, there's much more emphasis on being than there is on doing. And again, just a reminder that that very first one, identity, collectivism versus individualism, serves as a foundation for most of the others. It's really, really hard to spend 2, 3, 4 years in Bible college and not be a doing person because every time you turn around, you're slapped in the face with assignment due today, tomorrow, next week I got 3 things coming up, and so, we live in a world that makes it very difficult for us not to think about all the things that we have to do. And the fact is, every culture in the world has things to do. It's not that some cultures don't have anything to do, so they just sit around being. That's not the idea. It's a question, again, of emphasis. And I think all of us really work hard at trying, or at least we should work hard, at trying to find the right balance. And not everybody's going to have the same balance. You're going to know some people who just seem to get so much done, and you struggle to get things done. That is not necessarily a test of spirituality, okay? It may be a difference in the way you approach life. So the 2 blanks there are being and doing. Now, give me a Bible reference that emphasizes being for the Christian. Yes. Be still and know that I am God. Yeah, wow. And that word literally means stop struggling. Relax and watch me. Good. Another one. Give me another one for being. Yes. Okay, be imitators of God. And yet you could say that being an imitator of God involves doing things that imitate God. So, you could even bring the doing aspect into that. But you're right. The idea of becoming like Christ. Be doers of the word. Okay. Yeah, that one's definitely emphasizing doing things. Yeah, the language plays tricks on us sometimes, doesn't it? How about a passage that emphasizes doing? Yes. The Great Commission is a doing passage. Make disciples, baptizing them, teaching them to observe all things. Exactly. Give me another one. Yeah. Christ purified for himself, Titus chapter 2, a church zealous of good works. In fact, the book of Titus mentions good works 5 times in relation to what we do as believers. When you stand before Jesus Christ someday, you will give an account for the things done in the body, whether they be good or bad. So the Bible presents both and, okay? We are to be, Christ-like. In essence, that's what being is for us. It's Christ-likeness. But Christ-likeness doesn't exist in a vacuum. How is Christ-likeness manifested? By what we do and say. You see, so both of them come together. The question becomes, how do I know what the balance is? And that is not an easy question to answer. Every one of you will answer that a little bit differently. So how did you answer it as a group? Well, look at this. This one's different than most of them that we've seen. The lowest one on the assessment was 51, right in the middle. And so there is an obvious emphasis among you students, and I would be in this as well, on the doing side of things. And it just makes total sense, given the situation in which you're in right now. You know, your life is full of schedules, and not just one schedule, but 2 or 3 schedules. You have your school schedule, your work schedule, your church schedule, your personal schedule, and maybe some other schedule in addition to that. And so we are inundated with doing, but it ought to serve as a warning to us to be careful that we don't drown in that. And you say, how can I avoid that as a Bible college student? I don't know. Just work on it. Guess what? If it's any comfort, I'm in the same boat you are. My wife and I have talks almost every day about not getting everything done we needed to yesterday. And we pray, Lord, help us today, you know? So we're all in this struggle together. All right. Rules. Oh, here we go. Who's expected to obey them? So this is an interesting one. Universalism says what about rules? What would you think? Pardon me? Everybody. Universalism says it doesn't matter whether you're a state senator or a garbage collector. You speed, you get the same ticket, same penalty. See, that's universalism. It's the blind justice thing. You've seen that picture before where she's holding the balances and she's wearing a blindfold. Doesn't matter who you are, your status, your color, your job, your education level, everybody is subject to the same rules. Particularism, then, is obviously the contrast to that. No, rules are not intended to be applied equally to everybody. Now, the universal side is easier for us to associate with because that's pretty much what we think most of the time. Can you give me an example of a rule or a law that you would not consider applicable to everyone the same way? Yes. Taxes. Why would you say they're not applicable the same way to everybody? Okay, but proportionally, I could say that it's universal in the sense that proportionally everybody is supposed to pay, equally. Some who have more money will pay more, but the proportion, at least in theory, is the same. Now, whether it functions that way or not is debatable, and I don't want to get into a discussion about taxes. Okay, good. Somebody else. Yes. Okay, right. Laws of voting rights and other privileges don't apply to felons. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, when you are under arrest, then there's a certain sense in which you are stripped of your rights, or at least certain rights. And, and that, of course, is being challenged on several fronts. Anybody else think of a law or a rule that is applied differently? Yes. Pardon me? Okay, citizenship in what way? Okay, yeah, laws applying to citizens and non-citizens. Okay, yeah, that would be different. When it comes to laws applying to citizens, then it gets a little bit more tricky. Should all citizens be expected to abide in the same way? Of course, this is a very complex subject. And here in America, we are very much a universalistic culture when it comes to rules and laws. But in most collectivistic cultures, and most of the 2/3 world, that is not the case. And let me explain briefly why, at least one reason. In some countries, to penalize a state senator or a governor or a prime minister the same way you would any other citizen would be to bring shame upon the office and to denigrate the image of leadership in that country. And therefore, they would never think of expecting someone in that position to be subjected as anybody else would. Okay? So that is an example of particularism for the sake of protecting the honor and the image of leadership in that country. All right? Let me ask you this. Do you think the Bible creates exceptions for some people over others when it comes to God's laws, his commands? Yes. Okay, the book of James talks about the error that some in the church were making by showing favoritism to the rich, probably for personal advantage. Yes. Okay, deacons and pastors are actually held to a higher standard, and given the qualifications listed in 1 Timothy chapter 3. Okay, it's a good point. Given the nature of their position and the example that they set for the rest of the flock, they are required to uphold a higher standard. Interesting. What about laws like in the Old Testament for murder? Is anybody exempt, or is the law to be killed? Yes. Okay, yeah. If there's accidental, let's qualify this. Let's say premeditated murder. Is there any wiggle room for somebody who's committed premeditated murder, or is he to die? Period. He or she. Yeah. You should plead insanity. Yeah, which of course would not be a biblical approach to dealing with it. Yeah, I mean, not that there can't be actual cases where there are. Yeah, and I'm not going to get into that either. But we've really run with that one in our culture, haven't we? What about adultery? What did the Bible prescribe for adultery? Death, stoning. Yeah. Okay, so David commits adultery with Bathsheba, and he murders her husband. Does he get the death penalty? So is God a universalist or a particularist? He did spare David, but he also made an exception for David. Did he not? Is there any way to wiggle yourself out of that one? Yes, but why not God's? I mean, why didn't God make that provision for others? Why didn't he say in the Old Testament law, if you commit murder, but then you repent, I will show my grace? Liz? Uh-huh. Okay, Liz, you just brought up a really good point. Ultimately, every sin was paid for by the blood of Jesus Christ. So to say that David got off, yes, he did in the temporal sense of the term. He lived and died a natural death, but his sin did not go unpunished. God's justice must be satisfied, and it was ultimately satisfied through Jesus Christ. But in the law, God specifically prescribed consequences for sin. Even though Christ paid for all of them, a person would still be under the penalty of death in the theocratic system of the nation of Israel. So you're right that the ultimate provision has to be made for anybody to escape the penalty. But yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Look right here on campus. You guys remember at the beginning of the semester what Dr. Jim said up here when he's dealing with issues of sin and stuff? He said for the first, was it 2 weeks? He certainly said, or the first week, I can't remember. First 2 weeks, he said, you come and we will not kick you out if you want to deal with sin. Now the handbook says certain things are going to happen, but Dr. Jim says, I'm going to open a window here where for these first week or two, you come, you talk to us, and we're not going to apply that. See, that is an exception, okay? And he had every right to do that as the president of this college. You would not have a right to come to him and say, I demand 2 week window to deal with sin, you see? But he has as the president. Yes? You can discuss the implications of the Davidic covenant here. God made a covenant with David. However, when David killed Uriah and committed adultery with Bathsheba, he already had children. In other words, there would already have been the possibility of continuing the line in that situation. So the provision of the Davidic covenant would not have been canceled had he been killed in that situation. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He definitely suffered the consequences of his sin. Now, I would not say that he paid for his sin because I believe that he was forgiven. But even when you are forgiven, consequences may endure. And sometimes we cloud that. We confuse consequences with payment for sin. We have been forgiven in Jesus Christ completely. We are not guilty, and we never will be guilty again because Christ has completely satisfied God's demands. But that does not eliminate the consequences for sins that we have committed. You commit a sin and you commit drunk driving and you lose a leg in an accident. Being forgiven is not going to bring your leg back. Or if someone's in the car who is killed, okay, being forgiven is not going to bring that person back again. The consequences endure. And God in his grace used consequences like those in David's life to be a constant reminder to him of the seriousness of honoring God. So, if there are ongoing consequences, actually they are a manifestation of God's grace as a reminder. Anyway, that's expanding beyond what we have time for here, but those are all very good comments, okay? I want you to think, okay? I just want you to think. How do these line up with scriptural principles and so on? How did you all respond? Well, we're right about in the middle. We're back to the 398 thing again. And you were right in the middle of that. You all believe that in general, principles, laws apply to everybody, but there are circumstances in which God himself may act in a way differently, as he did in the case of David. And when you're in a country that recognizes this, be careful that you don't start just judging that country for being partial or showing favoritism. If the motive, there can be impure motives for showing favoritism to people in positions of authority. I get that, but it's not always the case. As I mentioned, sometimes it's a question of upholding the honor and image of those in authority. Okay? What about expressiveness? How do I express emotion? Who are the social butterflies in the group? You love, you smile, we got a few of those. And then there are those of you who would just as soon be in the shadows. You're very unexpressive. Unfortunately, someone who is less expressive is often judged as being what? Pardon? Stuck up? unfriendly, unattached. And you realize that somebody that smiles all the time and laughs and can be just as unfriendly and unattached as somebody that doesn't, so that is not really a measure of character. And that's one of the things I want to point out here. The way that you express emotion is not a commentary on your character. It's a commentary on your personality and a reflection of your culture, all right? We study what we call neutral cultures, and they're called neutral because it's really hard for you to guess what someone is thinking based on an emotional response. You know people like that. What's he thinking? The old poker face, right? That's the idea of a neutral culture. Is Spock happy? Is he sad? Is he mad? Exactly what's going through his mind. Probably, when am I going to get through with this scene so I can get my paycheck? And then there are affective cultures. Now, not effective. This is with an A because it has to do with the affections, the emotions. So an affective culture expresses itself. It shows the affections, the emotions, much more readily. Give me the example of a country that's very affectionate. Yes. Latin America in general, right? There would be some exceptions, some pockets, especially when you get down in Argentina and some other places that have a lot of British influence and things, and but in general, Latin America is very affective. What other part of the world? Yes. Okay. Yeah, certain pockets of Europe. Europe is not totally consistent when it comes to this. You have neighbors that are very different from each other. Yeah. The Italians especially are noted as very, very affective, just very bubbly, very jovial. And then mostly the continent of Africa is also very affective, okay? In fact, in Northeast Brazil, where we served, there was a lot of African influence, more so than any other ethnic influence. So again, and in America, what would you call America? More affective or more neutral as a culture? Yeah, the research tends to show Americans in general as tipping the scales more on the affective side, although we're an extremely diverse culture and you'll find all sorts. What region of our country would you say would be more affective? Yes, South, right? Where would you go to find a more neutral? Northeast, and again, I'm being very stereotypical, so if you're from the Northeast, excuse me. Okay, right. The Midwest, it tips more toward the affective side. All right. Now, what I want to just remind you is if you are from an affective culture and God sends you to a neutral culture to serve, be very careful that you don't misjudge the people in that culture. A lack of expression does not mean disinterest. In fact, there are some cultures that consider and expressing yourself emotionally as rude or showing disrespect, whereas remaining neutral shows that you're giving total attention to the person who's speaking. And so it's considered to be advantageous to be neutral. So, just be aware of that. Don't immediately draw conclusions about a person just because he or she is one way or the other. Interesting, when if I get on an airplane as an American to go to Brazil, okay, and I fly from Chicago to Dallas, I'm going to find the flight's pretty quiet. And then when I get on the flight from Dallas to Sao Paulo, man, all of a sudden, everybody's happy, everybody's excited, everybody's talking because the plane is now full of Brazilians heading home. So as an American, comparatively speaking, I would be more neutral. Again, just very broadly speaking. Now, if I, as an American, get on a plane headed into Tokyo, and I fly from Chicago to Detroit, and the flight's going to be pretty quiet. And as soon as I board for Detroit, in Detroit for Tokyo, I'm going to find that the level of quietness has gotten even more quiet. And the Americans on that flight are now the ones that are making the noise. whereas the Japanese in general are much more reserved. And so much of it is where you've come from and how you view somebody who's different. And sometimes you may be the loudmouth, other times you may be the quiet one. It just, there are so many factors that you have to consider. Be humble enough to recognize that, okay? So here's how you came out in this one. Pushing over more toward the affective side. And I think part of that is that you guys are members of churches where you have been involved. Most of you have had ministries in your churches. The kind of people that come to our school in general are people who have been serious about their local church ministry, and so they've worked at being outgoing and involved in their churches. And so there is maybe a tendency that way. But again, if your personality is more quiet, that doesn't make you inferior or superior, okay? It makes you different. And I think that this is one of the cultural values that is most blurred by personality differences. Remember, any one of them can be affected by different personalities, but this one especially is more affected by that. Okay? All right. Schedule. Do I see my schedule as linear or complex? What do I mean by that? Well, we're talking about the difference between monochronic and polychronic. So would somebody enlighten us? What does monochronic mean? Literally, yes. Okay, social norms. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. I'm going to ask you to make a change. I told you the other day that they've changed some of the way that they denominate these values, and these values are not inspired. And I apologize. I made the change in mine, and I forgot to make them before I published your notes. Okay? So if you would kindly change that one from social norms to schedule. Let me just make a quick comment about social norms so that you know why that was there. The social norms idea is how strict are social norms enforced in a given culture? In other words, how universally practiced are they? You can go to some cultures where the dress code, for example, is very indicative of who those people are and what they believe. Give me an example of that. Yes. Okay, in Korea, all right? Okay, the dress, and the more urban you get, the less that's true, because urbanization tends to change things. The strictest country on the social norm scale is Saudi Arabia. Okay, very, very strict. The dress code identifies who you are in society, identifies who you are spiritually, and you need to conform. And even there's some wiggle room, okay? Yes, sir. Where? India, in some pockets, yes. The way you dress, some people, having the red dot on their forehead, or depending on your caste, there are certain things that you would or would not wear. That can happen as well. Yeah. And so that's what the social norms think about. In the United States, we're much more to the other extreme, okay? In our country, what's a professional dress like? Depends. In some companies, it's a suit and tie. In some places, it's business casual. Suit and tie would actually be counterproductive to the work atmosphere. So that's the idea, okay? And even here at our college, there have been changes in dress code over the last decade. Decade ago, fellas, you'd have been wearing a tie. And so would I. I would have had to wear a suit and tie, you see. And so, there are changes, and that's much more common in the Western world. So anyway, that's what the social norms one was about. It's a newer field of study. So they've made some changes, and we're going to switch now to schedule. Do I see my schedule as linear or complex? So what does the word monochronic mean, literally? One time. Mono is one, chronic time. Chronometer is a timer, okay? So what that means is monochronic cultures focus on one linear schedule at a time. And that's pretty much how we live. You wake up from 8 to 8:30, I'm going to do this. From 8:30 to 9:45, I'm doing this. And a lot of that's related to your class schedules. Class schedules are linear monochronic schedules. Other countries really don't pay a lot of attention to that idea. They're much more relaxed in terms of their scheduling. A word like interruption is very important in a monochronic culture like ours, because if you're trying to follow that schedule and get through and all of a sudden, bam, something happens that throws the whole thing out of kilter, like COVID. All of a sudden, oh, everything's different, you know? We're learning to deal with that. Actually, COVID has been really, really good for us in that sense. It has taught us how to be flexible and how to be, you know, less locked into the linear monochronic way of approaching our day. But you see, in a polychronic culture, the word interruption really is very little used, because there you start your day and you have a concept of what you want to do. Rather than thinking linearly, you've got some ideas. I'm going to work on this and this, but maybe not at any particular time or order, depending on, you know, how much computerization has affected your particular environment. And so, you know, you're starting something and somebody comes along and says, hey, can you help me with this? And sure. And you don't sit there and think, oh, I was just interrupted. No, because a polychronic culture sees the blending and crisscrossing of schedules as normative. And therefore, being interrupted is, and this is something in Brazil I really struggled with, because I tended to value my day at the end of the day based on how well I was able to follow my schedule. And I was proud of myself when I got through it. But if there's a big interruption, all of a sudden something happens that blows everything out of the water, I feel like, man, my whole day was just shot. See, that's the monochronic mindset. And polychronic cultures don't get that. What are you so upset about? Well, everything I set out to do today just got blown out of the water. Well, why are you so strict about it? Why not understand a number of people and schedules coming in randomly as part of God's plan for your day? So there's a balance there, you know, and we tend to be very monochronic. If I say the word punctual, what do you think of? What does punctual mean? Point of time. So if I say we are going to start class at 7:30 punctually, then you look at your watch, it's at 7:31, the prof is late, right? But in other cultures, the word punctual has a much broader application. Imagine looking at a clock. It's, instead of saying you could say 7:30, but in a polychronic, less punctual culture, that 7:30 may actually start at 7:15 and run all the way to 7:45. You say, well, that's not 7:30. Well, it is to them, because 7:30 to them means right about here. It doesn't mean exactly when the second hand hits 7:30 precisely, you see. And so what I'm saying is, we're not concluding that these cultures are not punctual. We're simply saying that their idea of punctuality is different than ours is. Okay? Very interesting. All right, so how did you land on this one? Interesting. I was surprised at this one, frankly. I expected you to be way over on the monochronic side. And here you are, 60% actually leaning toward the polychronic side. Why do you suppose it landed there? Yeah. Desire of college students to have a little more freedom, right? I would love to be able to live that way. Okay, good. Who else? Yeah. okay? And sometimes doing something fun or different, interrupting your schedule to do something fun or different is a matter of survival, mental survival. Yeah, I just got to get out of this for a few minutes. Yeah. Yeah, yes. Okay, yeah, even the way that the questions are worded could, and that's part of the challenge of any of these types of assessments. Those who make them have to be very careful about how they word the questions, because the way that you as a Westerner read the question may be very different from the way that an Asian reads the question, or a Latin American. Exactly. Um, Another thing that may influence this is that in reality, you guys do practice a certain measure of polychronism. You have your class schedule, and then you're trying to weave your work schedule into that. Some of you are athletes and you have a practice schedule, or you work on campus, or you have rehearsals that are extracurricular. And then you have your church schedules. Wednesday night I'm in charge of this, and so whether you realize it or not, you are actually interweaving 3 or 4 schedules, which makes you to some degree polychronic. Now, it's not exactly the idea, but the concept is there of trying to maneuver several schedules. And what's frustrating is that you try to weave all of those schedules together without creating interruptions. That's the trick, right? How do I make all these blend together without interrupting myself? That's where the polychronic mind is different. Who cares if we interrupt ourselves? It's not all that crucial that I get this done right now. See, so in essence, you still are monochronic in concept, even though you're trying to weave together several different schedules into one. You're trying to do it in a way that avoids interruptions. Man, we live in a crazy, who created this whole time thing anyway? Well, guess who? God did. God created time and space. So good. Well, these are the cultural dimensions or values that we study. And again, it's not an inspired list. These are ones that have been looked at, and it's a very fluid study. I encourage you to read more on the subject. Fascinating field. The diversity of cultures in our world is absolutely incredible. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, Kevin, and I won't repeat all that for the sake of those listening on the recording, but Kevin has just given us a bunch of different factors that may contribute to what makes a culture individualistic or collectivistic, and those are some good comments. There isn't any one thing. There is a number of factors that contribute to that. one of them is the Industrial Revolution. The more industrialized a culture, the more individualistic it tends to be, although that's a general principle. Also, remember the influence of the Greek democratic idea in Athens, okay? And the democratic idea there championed individual contribution, and we continue to reflect that in our culture today. So political system also has something to do with that. And of course, industrialization and politics tend to blend together anyway, because money and politics go together. And so all those things are probably, yeah, it's a very complex system, but it's kind of settled into the West and non-West, primarily because of those two factors, the Industrial Revolution and the political ideologies involved. Yes. All right, good. Very good. This is just an overview. We'll spend an entire semester delving into that more. I just want to conclude by showing you one other thing that I think you might find interesting. Students of culture also try to create what we call clusters. Did I give you this in your notes or not, this map? Okay, this is not for something you need to know. I'm just going to show you this as extra. And again, this is extremely stereotypical, but there are 10 primary cultural clusters in the world that correspond to these values that we've talked about. The Anglo cluster, as you'll notice, is the most diverse. It's spread out, and that's because of the influence of the British Empire all around the world. So you have North America, you have Great Britain, and you have Australia and New Zealand, okay? And then the Nordic European, okay? And if you're Scandinavian, your roots are up there, this is the part of the world we're talking about. If you like IKEA furniture, okay, this is the concept. And it's fascinating. We'll talk about this next semester in the other class, but IKEA furniture is a very definite reflection of Nordic cultural thinking. And then the Germanic culture, and I didn't mention this earlier, but the Germanic culture is considered to be the most neutral when it comes to neutral and affective cultures. And then you have the Eastern European Central Asian, which is the largest in land mass. A lot of mobility there, nomadic lifestyles in their history, wars, climatic influences, droughts, and other things. It's a fascinating field to study. Latin European, okay, which takes in the red countries there. And then, of course, Latin American, which is an extension of that, and that's an interesting discussion. Then you have South Asian, and you have Confucian Asian, which is primarily China. And then you have the Sub-Saharan African, and that's because North Africa is really associated more with the Arabic culture because of the Islamic influence in North Africa. So, again, that's just a whole new, vast frontier for you to study if you're interested. There are books written about cultural clusters, and we delve into that a little bit in cultural anthropology. So we study the individual characteristics that we've just finished studying, and then you can apply those to different clusters and see which clusters champion which types of cultural values. So, all right, well, that's gives you something to chew on for a while. Now, if you'll give me there is some suggested reading. I'm not going to leave that up there. You can catch that later if you want. I actually put that slide up there for a workshop that I was doing in another place. It's not so much for you, but you're certainly welcome to take advantage. Give me a moment just to switch to the next PowerPoint. And I do want to start into non-Christian religions. Now, I have a couple students in here who are in my non-Christian religions class, so I probably should invite you to come up here and just teach this first part, but I won't do that to you. But you can handle this, I know your caliber. All right, when we talk about non-Christian religions, okay, we're not talking about the cults. Cults like Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, Christian Science, and so on, okay? Those are called cults because the word cult comes from the word sect, and it refers to a splinter group of Christianity in this case, because all those that I just named claim to believe the Bible as authoritative, even though they completely misinterpret it, and they add other so-called revelations to the Bible. But that's what a cult is. A non-Christian religion is different because non-Christian religions may respect the Bible, but they do not claim it as authoritative. It is not foundational to their religious beliefs. So Mahatma Gandhi, for example, a martyr in India, highly regarded the teachings of Jesus and even encouraged his disciples to read from the Gospels every day. But he never confessed the Bible as inspired by God, authoritative for his life. He viewed it as a great book of examples and good sayings and morality and all of that. So that's the difference. That's why we don't study Mormonism in non-Christian religions, okay? There's a question about the Catholic Church, which is it? I would classify the Catholic Church, even though this sounds a little odd, as a cult. Technically, it falls into the definition of a cult because it claims the scriptures as authoritative, but also adds church tradition, papal pronouncements and other things like that. Good. But there are some, you'll find when you study these that some books won't put Catholicism in either one of the categories, but it'll actually write a separate book just to talk about Roman Catholicism. In fact, in Brazil, that's what we did at our school. We had a special course on Roman Catholicism. Part of that, of course, is because Catholicism is so powerful and dominant in Latin America. So anyway, we're talking about groups that do not claim the scriptures, the Bible, our Bible, as authoritative. Indigenous religions, animists, and I tell my class this every year, there are some students of religion that do not consider animism to be a religion. They would say that animism is more of a mindset that can infiltrate other religions, but it's not a religion in and of itself. And part of the reason they say that is because it's difficult to find a collection of scriptures, writings that typify the animistic mindset. With other major religions, you have those. In Hinduism, you have the Vedas and the Upanishads. Okay, in Islam, you have the Quran. Okay, and so on. Hinduism, you have the writings of Buddha, and so on. But in animism, you don't find a universally accepted collection that says, this is our scriptures, this is what we believe. And for that reason, some scholars have said animism really isn't to be studied as a religion. Okay, and I respect that. I treat it as a religion because there are enough handles that we can get a hold of that teach about it that I think it's worth studying it in its own right. And so we do that in class. I'm just going to run a few things by you here. By the way, what does the word animism mean? Any thoughts on that? Yeah. Yeah, we use the word animated to refer to something that has qualities of life, even if it's a cartoon. Yeah, and so animation is the idea that there is spirit life in everything, animals, people, objects, everything. There is spiritual life embedded in everything around you. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Very good. Of course, indigenous is a word that means from the soil. And so most animism takes place in what we call indigenous cultures, cultures that are very traditional, with not so much cultures that have been taken over by a foreign nation where another religious system has been implanted. Okay, but it is true, and we just don't have time to do all this. I'm just trying to give you bits and pieces. It is true that animistic qualities can be found all over the world, even here in the United States. Can somebody give me an example of an animistic idea or practice that you would find in the United States? Yes. Halloween. Now, for most people, Halloween's just a lot of fun, dressing up like, whoever. When I was a kid, I dressed up with my mom's high heels, and we went and put her dress on and lipstick. I wouldn't do that today. But yeah, but there are some people that sit back and think, maybe there's something to that. What else in our culture reflects an animistic mindset? I have never had COVID. Knock on wood. What am I saying by knock on wood? So, yeah, I better do something to make sure it doesn't happen. It's, it's a superstition, right? Are any of you superstitious? We shouldn't be. But do we sometimes reflect superstitious ideas? Yeah, you hand up back there. Is that Jackson? Yeah, we do. My grandmother had a horseshoe hanging up over her door. She claimed to be a Christian. She trusted Christ, but we wanted her to take that horseshoe off of her door. She did not want that horseshoe removed from the door. Why not? You think it's going to help you? No. But don't take it off. Anybody here take a sneak peek at your horoscope online? And don't admit it if you do. But aren't you curious? Oh, you go to a Chinese restaurant. Do you know that the only place in the world where you can find fortune cookies is in an American Chinese restaurant? And you break that fortune cookie open, and you read it, you think, nah, this doesn't mean I'm just doing it for fun. And it says, today, something really special is going to happen. And you're thinking, nah. Well, you know what I mean? We're not totally innocent, are we? And so this happens. So anyway, let me just show you a few things. Let's look at the bigger picture of how religion is developed, because this is interesting. There's a theory that is very evolutionary that says, in the beginning, when man was first evolving, he was very animistic. Everything was God. There was spiritual activity everywhere, and there's all these superstitions, and man was just really backward. And then he kind of reduced it to polytheism, where he began to define a number of gods that kind of surfaced out of all of this. And then over time, some people actually reduced theirs to monotheism. Now you only have one main God, or one God, period. And then as man continues to evolve, he eventually sheds even that God and becomes an atheist. Now he's fully mature. He's rid himself of the crutches of all of these other manifestations of religious dependence. See, that's the evolutionary concept. Now the Bible presents quite a different. Which one here would be first in the biblical concept? Which one? Monotheism. God created the world, he created Adam and Eve, and out of that sprouted polytheistic ideas. And in fact, you could actually argue that in the Garden of Eden, polytheism actually sprouted, because when Adam and Eve gave their allegiance to the serpent rather than to God, in essence, they were planting the seeds of polytheism by submitting to a God other than their creator. And then atheism, and I put atheism in parentheses, in quotes, because in reality, most people who call themselves atheists are probably more agnostics. God created us, he wired us with the concept of a creator, a higher being. We suppress that, Romans 1, but we cannot eliminate it. So, a few characteristics. There's spirit guidance through magic and sacrifices and so on. Many non-Western cultures are quite colorful because of the public nature of their religious practices. And when they highlight certain things, especially things that come from the natural world, they believe that it's more than just a pretty plant or a pretty object. There is a deity somehow, or a spirit or an ancestor somehow associated with that. There's a focus on the temporal rather than the eternal. Interesting. In fact, I would say this: most animistic cultures really don't care that much about ultimate reality. What are the attributes of God, or is there even an ultimate God? They're not worried about that. What they're worried about is how they're going to feed their family tomorrow. Who am I going to marry? Am I going to get over this sickness? Are my crops going to grow? And so they go after local deities or spirits or ancestors in order to find answers to those questions. And the ultimate questions of, truth and reality really don't interest them for the most part. Organic methods, oaths, curses, prophecies. What is necromancy? Yes. It's consulting the dead, exactly. Yep, it's what King Saul did, right? Dreams, visions, trances, spirit possession. Now, does God work through dreams? Or let me ask it this way: has God worked through dreams and visions? And yes, absolutely. So, is the Bible guilty of, participating in animistic practices? It's quite the other way around, actually. Animism has latched on to biblical principles and twisted them for their own purposes. That's exactly what Satan does. God is the one who establishes truth. Satan will pick elements of that truth and twist them in order to deceive and manipulate mankind, and he calls it truth. All right. And then there are mechanical methods that they use: divination, astrology, cheiromancy, which is the use of lots, casting of lots to manifest. And again, God used lots. That doesn't make God animistic. That just means that animism, under the direction of Satan, has imitated God's design. Ordeals, omens, so on and so forth. Bird flies over, right? An owl flies over, and King Herod Agrippa says, uh-oh, something's going to happen, All right. And then 5, there is, as I mentioned earlier, there is a lack of textual formality. You can't find one collection of animistic scriptures that all animists cling to. It just doesn't exist. And part of the reason for that is because animists are really keyed to experience more than to doctrine, okay? And that's why they're so polytheistic. Any spirit or deity that is more powerful than the one they happen to be serving right now, and that can deliver them from a curse placed on them by an ancestor, is good enough, at least for now. Right. So that is just kind of an overview of some animistic ideas. I'm just going to throw some pictures at you here. These are the types of things that you'll see if you type in animism or spiritism in a search engine, and they can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And you have to be careful that you don't draw conclusions about what something means just because of the way it appears to you or strikes you, okay? There are animists who believe that by going through certain rituals, they can adopt the spirit of a certain animal, or in this case, a bird. And so the spirit of that bird actually comes to indwell and control that person, giving them special powers and abilities. And so many times they will dress using, that which makes them appear like that animal or that bird. Masks, sometimes used to scare away evil spirits. And, we laugh at that and we say, how silly. But I want to advise you, be very careful that you do not just assume that animists are stupid or uneducated. That is a gross misrepresentation. Say, well, don't animists realize that the reason you get sick is because you happen to come in contact with a virus? And many of them would say, hey, I'm a scientist, I'm a doctor, and I understand how germs work, but I also believe that the reason that some people come in contact with those viruses and others do not is not just random, but because there's spirit activity that is manipulating where you go and where those germs end up. Interesting. So to simply say that they don't understand how germs work is an injustice. Okay, yes, sir. Yeah, a little different concept of the mask, yeah. And how would you like it if we started using masks like that around here? That'd be interesting. And then what is this? This is a typical idea of a gate. Probably the most famous one is the Shinto gate that many of you have seen, the big red one that's in that's down near Hiroshima, and that's where the spirits enter and exit. And so certain types of things are hung there in order to attract or repel certain kinds of spirits. But they believe that the spirit world, enters through those and then becomes active in your region. Okay, and then there's tarot cards. There are, palm reading and reading tea leaves and feathers and cowrie shells And I'm just going to throw something at you to consider. These two books that I've put on the screen are written by guys that actually tend to believe that God originally placed his gospel message in the constellations. Now, you might think this is really, really weird, and that's okay if you do, but I would encourage you at least to pick up one of these books and read it. And the idea of these authors is that God is the one that planted his story. The Virgo the Virgin is actually originally there to symbolize the Virgin, that Mary, that God prophesied way back in Genesis 3 would come and whose seed would crush the head of the serpent. Leo the lion, corresponding with Christ coming back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. I mean, it may sound really strange to you, but I encourage you to read it. I think you'll find it interesting reading, whether you end up accepting any of it or not. And of course, the idea of these guys is that Satan takes what God designs and he corrupts it and turns it into spiritism and horoscope and all that. So anyway, yeah, the reading of stars and comets and things like that. What's that? Dare I ask if anybody has ever tried this? I mean, I don't know about today, but I know that, yeah, okay, does it work? Yeah, no, it doesn't work. Okay. There are some who would swear by it, and they claim that when you get over water, it starts to vibrate or to be weighted down. So, there's water. And there are some people who have tried to defend this scientifically and say, there are certain things that happen in the scientific world, the material world, that cause that to happen. I encourage you not to go there. Seances, calling the spirits, that sort of thing. This is necromancy, consulting the dead. What about that one? That comes right out of the Bible. Genesis 28, Jacob's dream, Jacob's ladder. So Jacob was animistic. No, Jacob wasn't animistic. This is God acting on truth, and then man corrupts it later on. You see, that's a fascinating story we won't take time today to talk about. Some African religious traditions. Let's see if we can get through these. Although animism is everywhere, it is particularly evident in Africa. And if I were to ask you what region of the world is most dominated by animism, there's no question the African continent would win. Of course, part of that is just because of the sheer size of the continent. Animism is marked by interpretation of experiences rather than interpretation of written scriptures. And again, that's why you can't find a codified summary of animistic doctrine. They don't care so much about that. These primal experiences, and primal experiences may not be a good designation, but it's one that you'll find out there. It's really more evolutionary in its idea. They include dreams, visions, voices, spiritual healings, and a sense of presence. You see, if your parents die and you're an animistic person, in your mind, they have not disappeared from the earth. They are still wandering around where you live, but now in a different form. And if you had a bad relationship with your parents, you might be fearful that they're going to cast some sort of a spell on you or do something to you to get even for what you did to them when they were still physically alive. I mean, that type of thing is very, very normal in an animistic mindset. Look at this. About 30% of Americans, 36% of British, and 60% of Canadians. I don't know why the Canadians such bigger, a few Canadians here don't take that personally. They claim to have had some sort of primal experience. Okay. Interesting article that I would commend to all of you, written by Paul Hebert, a very well-known Christian anthropologist who's, I think, with the Lord now. He wrote an article called "The Flaw of the Excluded Middle." The flaw of the excluded middle. And what he meant by that was, we Westerners have so dichotomized our view of things that we have left out a very important element. For us, everything is either scientific or, way out there. God in his eternal home someplace. And we have so separated ultimate, spiritual teaching from day-by-day scientific reality that we've left no room for any kind of interaction with the spirit world or with God, or however you want to define that. And so what he does is he says, this is the way it is in our world, but if you go to the 2/3 world, most of our world, the non-Western world, you'll find that there is much more attention given to spiritual interaction in the lives of people. All right, and of course, a lot of this is heretical. It's false teaching. But I'm just saying that there is an awareness of, an acknowledgement of spirit activity. What we Westerners will just automatically explain scientifically, someone in an animistic culture might say, wait, there's more to it than that. There's something going on. This isn't just random chance happening. See, and the article is very good. I would encourage you to read it, because if you read Faith's doctrinal statement, you read your church's doctrinal statement. How many of you will find in your doctrinal statement a specific statement about demon possession and casting out demons and how to deal with someone who is troubled by spirits? You're not going to find that in your church doctrinal statement. You may have a very brief statement about Satan and angels and existing, and they rebelled against God or whatever. Well, why? Because we don't deal with that. At least we don't think we do here in our culture. Okay, but if you're starting a church as a missionary in an African nation, you may find that you need to include in your doctrinal statement a very specific statement on the spirit world and what the Bible teaches about it, because that's a big deal to them. Okay, that's what you have to keep in mind. The doctrinal statements that we make in order to satisfy the situations in which we live. They correspond to the issues. Our college has modified our statement, not changing our doctrine, but we have added in the past statements about gender and what marriage is and evolution. Why? Because these have become important in our culture, and we have responded to that by adding statements. So you go to an animistic culture, you may find that the doctrinal statement contains some things that you've never even thought should be part of a doctrinal statement. Here's what I told you before. You get bitten and, or you catch COVID and you say, well, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And an animist is going to say, no, I think that there was something that led you there, or something that led somebody to you who was infected. There's spirit activity going on behind the scenes. And you may tend to grin at that and say, that's ridiculous. And you may not be as right as you may think you are. Satan is alive and well. Think of all the passages of Scripture that talk about the battle against the forces of evil. You all know Ephesians 6. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in the heavenly places. The devil, as a roaring lion, goes about seeking whom he may devour. Resist him. We are told to resist the forces of evil. I mean, the Bible is full of those passages. And I'm not trying to be sensational here. I'm just trying to swing the pendulum back a little closer to the middle than we sometimes allow it to come. Okay, there's Tower of Babel. What happened there? When man sinned, the heavens were closed. The fount of blessings was shut up. So man decides he's going to get to God his own way. So he builds a tower to get close to the heavens so that he can call out the blessings of God. Who does he consult with? Let us. God's out of the conversation. But God, in the very next chapter, which I didn't put here, chapter 12, says, no, I'm going to do it my way. I'm coming through Abraham. I'm calling on Abraham. I'm going to bless Abraham and bring the promise through him. So 11 is Babel, 12 is Abraham. And it's interesting to study those two side by side, total opposites. And then God confirms his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he does that through Jacob's dream. He says, I am going to bless. And what's Jacob doing when God does this? He's sleeping. What is Abraham doing when God ratifies his covenant with him? He's sleeping while God passes through the animals by himself. What does that tell us? It tells us that it's not man's effort to get to God, to restore the blessings that he lost. It's God pursuing man. Religion, with the exception of biblical Christianity, all religion is man reaching up in whatever way he has devised to try to secure the blessings. And biblical Christianity is God reaching down to man. Chapter 11, chapter 12. Babel, God. That's the essence of the difference between biblical Christianity and every other religion in the world. The angels going up and down the ladder signify what? It's God interacting with man. It's not Jacob's descendants who are going up and down that ladder. This is a supernatural act of God. It's wonderful. And then Jesus, when he sees Nathanael, what's he tell him? He says, you're going to see the angels of God ascending and descending on the ladder. What does he say? The angels descending and ascending on the Son of Man. What does Jesus do? He replaces the ladder in Jacob's dream with himself. He is the ladder. He is the way. That's why the church was called the way so commonly in the book of Acts. You see, this is God at work. It's a beautiful story. Well, we'll save this one for next time, and appreciate your good attention. We'll see you on Tuesday, Lord willing.